You guys aware of NFPA and what's going on with that at all? Nope. Okay, well, you will now. The National Fire Protection Association, that's NFPA. 72 is basically, it has to do with emergency evacuation and fire alarm systems. And for over 8 years, as this says, the code had a requirement for emergency voice alarm communication systems. And they wanted them capable of reproducing pre-recorded or live speech, but with intelligibility. However, up to now, this requirement was only in what we called Appendix A of the code. 2008 was the last one that had it in the appendix, and therefore it wasn't enforceable as part of the code. So now, this year, for the first time, and it's 2010's version of NFPA 72, you can supersede the fire alarm with a voice-based emergency announcement. It actually suppresses the fire alarm. And in the history of the code, never before have they allowed anything to suppress the fire alarm. And the reason I do that now is that you have other emergencies. With 9/11 and the campus shootings and things like that, they have other emergencies that can supersede this, because you know, if you have a shooter on campus, what are you going to do? Pull the fire alarm and give you more targets? You know, that's not going to work. So, for the first time in history now, we can override the fire alarm, and it's according to code. So, it's called Chapter 24. That's the new chapter. And in any new facility with a capacity over 300 people, the agent having jurisdiction, or AHJ as it's called, which is essentially the fire marshal, he may require, excuse me, an intelligible voice evacuation system be installed in the facility. And that is part of the fire code now. The system may be tested for adequate intelligibility as described in Annex D, which is in the back of the fire code. So they don't necessarily have to test it, but if the fire marshal has any doubt that it's absolutely clear and perfect everywhere, he'll say, I need you to test this system, okay? A number of test methods are listed. You can do monosyllabic word tests and things like that, but the only real practical one is an STI or STIPA measurement with a passing score of 0.5 or higher, okay? Yes? We will get there. Okay. So let's review some of the metrics that we've used for intelligibility that have been common in our industry for years and years now. The earliest one, back when I started out as a sound contractor, was called percent Alcons. Also there's STI, RASTI, STIPA, and CIS. So we're going to talk about these because some of these will come up as you're looking at it. So Alcons was the first. VMA Pertz was the guy that came up with it, a European gentleman. And it's the percent of articulation loss of consonants. So in other words, when you can no longer tell the difference between the word butter and putter, you're losing intelligibility and can't understand what's going on. And within the context of a sentence, you can tolerate a little more than just a single word test, but they figured all that out. And they said once it gets beyond 15%, it's no longer reasonably intelligible within the context of a sentence. It was good for Germanic languages with consonant-based articulation, like English, French, German, even Latin. However, Asian languages are vowel-based for intelligibility, and it didn't do so well. So it didn't translate very well once you went over the Pacific, and it, because of that, it had that shortcoming to it. 15% Alcons is considered the limit for good speech intelligibility. No more than 15% loss. So we go on to STI. STI was created by Mr. Stenigan and Houtgast. They're also from Europe. And it equals speech transmission index is the term they use for this. And the IEC standard for STI is 60268-16. And that is defined as an international IEC standard worldwide. STI is actually calculated, it's a signal-to-noise ratio calculation from a matrix of 14 modulated frequencies. So there's 14 frequencies that are modulated, and the modulating frequencies are from 0.63 hertz to 12.5 hertz. So the modulation of the signal is fairly slow, but that's how we modulate noise with our vocal speech. The vocal cords make a buzz that's up in the thousands of hertz, but then our mouth opens and closes, and that's that modulation of our mouth opening and closing that they're reproducing from a half to about 12 hertz of modulation. And it's at 7 weighted ISO octave band noise signals on octave band centers from 125 to 8 kilohertz. And so 6 of those are artificial speech bands. 1 of them is actually just a test band to make sure that the signal's getting out right and that kind of thing. Even by today's standard of computer speed, calculating the resulting 98 values was pretty intense. When B&K first started doing this in about 1980, 1981, B&K started to do this. They were the first that I was aware of that were doing STI measurements. To do a single STI measurement took 20 minutes to calculate it. Well, our computers are a little faster now. So at any rate, right now today with Easra SysTune, it calculates a full STI, all 98 values, in real time, and doesn't even need the specialized modulation transfer function signal to do it. I don't know if have any of you guys ever heard an MTF signal? It sounds kind of like a washing machine. It's a wash, 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 and it repeats, and it's a lot like a washing machine. And that's the modulation going on of the 7 octave bands of pink noise. So we can even do it now. Easra SysTune does it now without using that modulation transfer function signal. It can use any signal source you like. It's on pink noise, music, anything that's got enough energy at those 7 octave centers, it will do it and come up with the results for you. It does this because it calculates the STI from the impulse response of the speaker. So it doesn't directly measure the signal noise of the 7 octave centers. How they do that, I don't know, but it works. Okay. RASTI, okay. Back in the old days, when computers weren't nearly as quick as they are today, they developed RASTI because they didn't want to wait 20 minutes for every measurement they made. Because if you were measuring a whole bunch of points on the floor of a big room, you'd be there for days just getting all the points. So they came up with RASTI, and RASTI stands for Room Acoustic Speech Transmission Index. Originally it was Rapid Speech Transmission Index, and it calculated the signal noise ratios in only the 500 and 2K bands. So instead of doing all 7 octave bands, they only did 2 of them, and it would have a lot less calculations, and you'd get a number a lot more quickly. STIPA. So more recently, STIPA was developed to quickly measure speech intelligibility for public address systems. Speech Transmission Index for public address is what it means, STI for PA, if you will. And it simplifies the full STI measurement by calculating the signal noise ratios with only 2 modulation frequencies at each of the 7 octave bands. So basically it makes 14 measurements instead of 98. And so it comes up with a result a lot quicker, or a result in a reasonable amount of time these days with a much less powerful microprocessor. So it can be handheld and that kind of thing. Yes?
So are these measurements actually considered useful?
Are these measurements actually considered useful? Yeah, they are. They correlate quite well. I've done ST.
We were at Paul's conference, Pat's conference about light arrays, and he talked about articulation.
Right.
And there was no consensus as to what the ways to really measure.
Yeah, it's,
all these different measurements, but they didn't really translate well to the real world.
no, the STI translates quite well. And Peter Mapp is, of course, he's the IEC committee chairman on STI for that international standard. He's the chairman. And of course, he'll never be happy, but he shouldn't be, if you know what I mean. But yeah, it does correlate quite well in a lot of different situations. It makes quite a difference. I had an old cathedral that I was measuring, and at this one point, there were these big columns that had big flat sides on 45-degree angles of the columns. And I got right to the point where that 45-degree angle would bounce it right back out. And so you'd hear it from the speaker, and then you'd hear it off that column, and it was very disconcerting. And as you move the measurement mic up, you got these STI measurements, and when you put it right there, it dropped like a rock. So it definitely correlates with what I was hearing quite well. So, you know, is it perfect? No. Will it ever be? Probably not. Is it good enough? Yeah. It's good enough for what we're doing now. Okay? Good enough to be an international standard accepted all over the world. So. Okay, so CSR, or CIS, try it again, John. CIS is the Common Intelligibility Scale, and it's also part of an IEC standard. And it was created to map all the methods. So if you did word tests, if you did Alcons, if you did STI, if you did STIPA, if you did RASTI, it didn't matter what kind of measurement you did, there was a conversion to the Common Intelligibility Scale. So that way, no matter what test method you use, you can come to an agreed set of numbers that are going to match up regardless of your testing method. So in SysTune, the STI is calculated in this way, or you could go the other way and calculate a CIS from STI. And I haven't put that other formula in yet. I need to do that for tomorrow. So, as you can see here, here's your Sti score. It goes from 0, which is no intelligibility at all, to 1.0, which would be the equivalent of, you know, headphones. And then 0.5 is the acceptable. You can see with CIS, the 0.5 is a 0.7. So it has a little bit different scale. It's more of a logarithmic change there. But you can see for intelligibility, there's the ratings and how they all relate to each other. So passing score for the new fire code is 0.5 or above. Anything below that is a failing score for intelligibility. 0.5 STI, RASTI, or STIPA, because they're all the same, is 0.7 of CIS, which is also 15% Alcons. So they relate all the way back to when we first started measuring intelligibility. All of these are approximately equal to about an 80% word comprehension rate and a 95% sentence comprehension rate. And what that means is if you did a word test, you'd score right 80% of the time. And if you were listening to sentences, 95% of the time you would understand every sentence. You're not going to be able to hear it back there. If you come in and sit down, you'll get into the pattern of the way these have been steered, and you'll hear it better. You were not getting an STI of 0.5 or above back there, were you? Now you are. Okay? All right, so that's what the equivalent is for individual words or words within a sentence so that you can have intelligible comprehension. Okay, intelligibility, and in this case, this is a very old nomograph, Alcons versus signal-to-noise ratio in RT60. In the old days, you saw percent Alcon here. I put in 0.5 STI because that's the equivalent. This is from SynodCon Sound System Engineering, the first edition, the old skinny yellow book. Okay, the old one. Okay, having a signal-noise ratio of over 25 dB removes the detrimental effect of noise on the intelligibility of speech. So once your speech signal is 25 dB above the noise floor no longer matters. It doesn't bother your signal at all. And as you can see right here, once you had more than 25 dB of signal to noise, here's your signal to noise in dB. Here's the percent Alcons or 0.5 STI across here. But once you get above 0.25, then you can see that there's absolutely no more detrimental effect because of the signal to noise ratio. I often have people that when they do sound systems, they'll go into the room, they're going to put the sound system in, and what do they always measure? always, what do they measure? The RT60. Because everybody's been told RT60 and reverberation will hurt your speech. What don't they measure when they should? The ambient noise floor. That will kill you long before the RT60 does, but they hardly ever measure it when they do this. It's much more detrimental in many more of the rooms we put sound systems in than RT60 is. Until you get to extremely reverberant rooms, ambient noise is your dominant problem. Okay, so even in anechoic conditions, having a signal-noise ratio, did I go too far? Let me go back up. Can I page up on this? Uh-oh. There we go. Did I go too far? No, I didn't. Okay. Having a signal-noise ratio under 10 dB has a substantial detrimental effect on your intelligibility. So if you look at it, here's your signal-noise ratio of 10 dB, and if you follow this up, you'll realize that your percent of articulation loss is pretty bad already. You have to have almost an anechoic room, and even in an anechoic room, you've got 7% articulation loss, which is about an STI, probably 0.75. So you've lost half your range of acceptable intelligibility just because you only have 10 dB signal to noise. Okay? It really hurts you bad. Okay? 10 dB signal noise ratio gives you a 7% loss of articulation even outside. You don't even have to be indoors. The ambient noise level is 10 dB below. I would imagine right now the noise floor is probably about that now with everybody talking in here. You're losing half my intelligibility just because of the noise floor being so close to the same level as the speaker. Okay? So, they're doing one over there. As you can see here, a 4 dB signal noise ratio is unacceptable under any conditions. So even in a fully anechoic chamber, if you only have the noise floor 4 dB below your speech, you're done. You can't understand anything. So we lose half the intelligibility. Yes?
That's the bar, the cocktail phenomena.
Oh, Putty Rogers, yeah. Well, she was talking a little bit more about penetrance forms and how you could local in on certain conversations in the cocktail bar thing, cocktail party effect, yeah. But we lose half the intelligibility with a 10 dB signal noise ratio. Now, why am I beating this to death? How many paging systems are 10 dB above ambient noise level? Not a lot of them, depending on the situation. So be very, very aware of what your signal noise ratio is with ambient noise. Even before any detrimental effects of room reverberation or other speakers aimed at, because reverberation, like in a distributed system, speakers far away from you are noise. They're the same signal, but they're not arriving within an intelligible window, and so they will be detrimental to your intelligibility. And there's a lot of designers, particularly these days, that did fire alarm enunciation signals. And they'll go, okay, well, how many speakers do we put in here to make it intelligible? And the answer is, if the ceiling's high enough like this is, you could fill it solid with speakers and it may not be intelligible because most of them are hurting you rather than helping you. So there's not this critical mass of, gee, just increase the number of speakers and it becomes intelligible. It could never get there. Hence, steerable line arrays, much better solution for this kind of thing. Okay. To ensure that a system has adequate intelligibility, more than 10 dB signal noise ratio will be needed. I would say it's more like 15 or 20, depending on the room, of course, but you need quite a bit of more level from the sound system than you do from the ambient noise level. Especially true in a room even with only a half-second reverb time. If you look here, you have a half-second reverb time, okay? You look and see how much articulation you're going to lose. If you get to the point where you're at 10 dB, you're done. Even at like 8 dB or so, or I'm sorry, around 11 or 12 dB signal noise ratio, you're still done. You're already exceeded the amount of articulation loss. you have to have more than 12 dB signal noise ratio to have it intelligible in a room with just a half-second reverb time. So, NFPA requires you to have a paging level that's 15 dB louder than an ambient noise level of the facility. That's what they recommend. However, think about it. Let's say you have the crowd level 75 dBA. Now, matter of fact, what is it in here right now? I'll look. Let's see, what do we have? Let me pop one up here. Take it, and I'll see if I've got it in A weighted or not. And it's flat, so I got to change the weighting to A. So right now we got about 72 dB SPL, okay? So at 72 dB SPL in this room, I've got to have, 87 to have 15 dB signal noise ratio for my paging level. Now, for a normal page, do you really need that or not? For an emergency page, you do. And the work I've done in some airports, I go in there and I find that the paging level and the emergency paging level are the same level. And they shouldn't be. But they do that because anytime somebody tests the system, they do an emergency page and some employee complains. Oh, that's too loud, I don't like that, you know. Well, too bad. If a tornado's coming bearing down on the airport, you don't give a damn if they're annoyed by it, okay? It has to be intelligible. Excuse me? Yeah, if they're annoyed, they can go outside, that's right. So keep in mind the requirements we're gonna have, and particularly in an airport, believe me, the ambient noise level is like this. It's 72, 75, and if the room has any reverberation, you may find you've got to have a much higher paging level. Let's say the emergency excites the crowd. Somebody says, gee, you know, a plane just came in and one of the guys got off the plane and took anthrax and threw it up into the air or something. You think they might get a little louder than 75 dB? A lot louder, okay? So you may find your emergency paging level needs to be 95 to 100 dBA. Now, what's happened with paging speakers recently? When I started out way back in the 70s, when I had black hair, you had these speakers that were like 98 dB SPL, 1 watt, 1 meter, you know? Atlas, what was the number, 803s? You know, they had coaxes in them and they were very efficient. What do you get now? All the speakers we have now are in these nice little enclosures, but they're speakers that were made for either home stereo application or car audio, and they get great bass, but if you look at their sensitivity, it's not 98 anymore, it's 88. Or it's a 4-inch and it's 85. Now you got something that gives you 1 watt, 1 meter at 85. What am I going to have to do to get to 100 dB? How much power am I going to have to pump into each speaker to get that? Keep this in mind when you're designing systems in any public space anymore, because the new law is going to require this. Okay? So basically you're going 95 to 100. You're doing rock concert levels, aren't you? 95, that's a concert level sound system. So there's going to be a rude awakening as this code spreads. Now there are, the local fire marshal in any part of the country doesn't have to adopt the newest code yet. They could still be running on 2003, or they could be running on 2008, and that's their standard. I'll tell you this, the 2010 code is being accepted more widely and quickly than any other new code upon release. It's really being picked up fast by lots and lots of fire marshals. But they don't know what they're getting into yet. Yeah. I'm not really sure. I can't, a fire marshal's an ex-fireman. He has no technology background, but I think they're doing it because the buzz is going around that, hey, if you're going to have, terrorist attacks, if you're going to have snipers on campus, if you're going to have these things happening, we need to be up to date with this stuff. Because on the other side of the coin, you've got the owner. And if the owner says, well, our local code is still 2008 here, we don't have to do 2010. If somebody sues them because Susie went out and became part of target practice instead of hearing intelligibly and staying inside, the lawyer's going to say, isn't there a new code out? Well, we didn't adopt it here. Yeah, but isn't there a new code out to save lives? Then the word comes up called negligence. And they add 3 more zeros to the settlement. Okay? So this is going to take off fast. I can tell you right now, airports all over the country, big arenas all over the country are starting to look into this, and they want to meet this code even if the fire marshal doesn't have it enforced in their jurisdiction. They want to meet this because, God forbid, if anything happens and somebody sues them, they can't be accused of being negligent if they've at least made the effort to meet the latest code. And you're going to have to be able to measure intelligibility to do this, okay? All right, here's the next issue you need to be aware of. Here's SysTune, here's the STI it has. And what you're going to see right here is there's another signal here. You see noise levels and system masking and this kind of thing. And what this does, it enables you to go make an STI measurement. Now, when I do it at an airport, when can I go out to an airport and play washing machine noise over the speakers at 95 dB and then go out and make measurements? 2 in the morning is the answer, okay? When there are no people there, then I can go and do this, okay? How am I going to have the effect of the ambient noise of a crowd at noon in the airport be measured? The answer is you have to separately capture the ambient noise level and add it to the measurement. So you go out, you do your STI, then you add the ambient noise level in, and then it gives you a result for the combination of those 2 files, and then you can definitely tell what that is. And the code calls this out specifically. It says measurement for occupied spaces and measurement for unoccupied spaces. And if you're measuring an unoccupied space, you must add in the ambient noise level later. So if you have a system that measures STI or STIPA, if you can't add an ambient noise file to the measurement you made, you're screwed. At least if you're doing a facility like an airport or something like that, okay? You got to be able to add that signal in. So this gives you the ability to evaluate the effect of realistic crowd noise even when there's not a crowd there when you're measuring the STI. You add it in later. Okay? So 1, before performing intelligibility testing, a system has to have optimized gain structure. Why? Because the system's got to be able to get loud enough. You got to have the gain structure correctly done. How many systems have optimized gain structure? In my experience, 10%. 15%. That many? Yours is left, Jim? Yeah. Okay. You also must make sure you properly equalize the speakers. And here's another one. Oh, they're only little paging speakers. We don't need to equalize those. Well, guess what? They need it a lot more than big fancy speakers. Big fancy speakers are closer to being flat out of the box than little ceiling speakers are. So you need to have them equalized. And that'll give you the best maximum signal noise at all the 7 octave bands. It'll give you a higher result in your STI measurements. The level has to be as loud as possible. I want to push it way up there. And one of the things you can do with gain structure, of course, is you can take that 20 dB peak to average ratio and you can reduce it to 10 or even 6 if you have to. And with some of these little very inefficient ceiling speaker systems I've run into, I've had to do that. I've had it where until I reduced the peak to average ratio with full gain, I couldn't even get a system to feed back with an SM58 under a 12-foot ceiling with a distributed speaker system because it was so underpowered. Because they didn't think about how inefficient today's ceiling speakers are. So you really need to be able to know how to reduce the peak to average ratio with your gain structure by putting limiters at the back end before the power amps. You need it as loud as you can get it without clipping the amps. And that way, even with a panicked crowd, the signal noise ratio is going to be as high as possible. Why? It's going to save lives. And why for the owner? It's going to save lives. And it's going to lessen the chance that he's going to get sued. Because believe me, once the ambulance chasers realize they've got a new market, they're going to be on this big time. So you need to help out your clients as much as you can. So when you measure the STI during quiet times, you got to add the ambient noise level later to get realistic results. And with easier SysTune, you get a full STI. It's the most accurate of the metrics we have for this. You can do it in real time with any kind of signal source. And then it gives you, you can also add in the ambient noise level that you record during the middle of the day. So that way you get a practical result even though you couldn't measure the noise at the same time. Okay? That's it.